everyone, welcome to our seminar. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Socializing Saves Lives, and I hope this is going to be a whistle-stop tour, 60 minutes of us exploring the many facets of being social. And I'm joined by 4 incredible panelists, actually 4, including me. Just big myself up then. I mean, me plus 3 incredible panelists to help navigate us through this brilliant topic. And I'm just going to give a little introduction, and I'll get on to introducing the panelists in detail. But as a sort of prelude to what we're going to be talking about, just cast your mind back over the last 18 months or so, and just have a think about the people that mean the most to you. How many friends that you might have missed over the last 12 months, how many relationships that you might not have been able to cultivate over the last 12 to 18 months. Now, we often think of relationships as being nice, but not necessarily necessary. But in the same way that we need food when we're hungry and drink when we're thirsty, that ache of loneliness that we all probably have felt, if not over the last 18 months and certainly other times of our lives, that discomfort of loneliness is our body's way of telling us to go out and seek company. But we've only just recently begun to understand how much of a primal requirement our social lives are to our health and well-being, not just our mental well-being, but our physical well-being as well. Multiple lockdowns have no doubt helped us see our relationships in a new light. And perhaps we might now think that we might not necessarily take our friendships for granted as much as we did in the past. Maybe it's time for us to expand our social circles. Maybe it's time for us to get new friends, who knows? But whether you found some new friends, you're getting back together with your old friends, it's important, it's clear that our relationships are super important to us. But did you know just how much of a lifesaver they can be? Now, over the last decade, numerous studies have shown that the number of friends that you have not only affects your life satisfaction, but also that they can provide a buffer against psychological trauma, depression, illness, and even dementia in older age. So when we look at it from that perspective, friends with benefits starts to take on a whole nother meaning. But why might this be the case? Why are our friendships just so important, not just to our mental well-being, but also our physical well-being? How have we evolved to be a species that depends so much on our social circles? Hopefully, as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, we might value these friendships even more. But the ways that we socialize might look a little different. We might be more aware of our health. We might want to spend more time outdoors. We might want to find other meaningful ways to connect with one another that aren't centered around the social lubricant that is alcohol. So where does that leave our most favorite social lubricant? And how can we understand how much it's played such an important role in our lives to date? How can we learn from really social communities that don't perhaps place alcohol on a pedestal as much as we do perhaps in the West? So today, as I mentioned, we are joined by a brilliant group of people who are going to help us explore all the facets of sociability, from how social rituals that surround tea and coffee have contributed to ways in which we meaningfully bond, to uncovering why alcohol could be considered the secret to humanity's success, controversial. We're also going to look at how we might socialise in the future and acknowledging how our drinking habits are evolving and what that might mean for how we get together in the future. So to help us navigate all of this, I am joined by Pedro Villalon, who is the founding partner of O5T. Pedro is a chemical engineer with over 2 decades in marketing and business management, but really he has this love for the exploration of and passion for tea, and Pedro travels all over the world, well, probably to where tea grows, to explore and understand this beautiful plant and to unpick the rich history of this lovely drink. So Pedro's going to talk about his experiences of drinking cultures, which have helped him build long and lasting friendships, even when language can be a barrier. Now, we're also joined by Robin Dunbar, who's the Emeritus Professor of Evolutionary Psychology at Oxford University, and definitely the only person that I know who has a number named after him. So Dunbar's number is Robin's discovery of the natural upper limit to the number of people in our social circles. I hope I got that right, Robin. Robin has published many books, articles, white papers, and a brilliant book recently called Friends, which I all recommend, on the nature of social bonding in the variety of human and non-human species. So Robin's going to help us trace our ancestors' past social habits so that we can better appreciate our friendships today. And is there anyone more social, anybody that epitomizes sociability more than Lauren Mote, who's the co-owner of Bittered Sling and the Diageo and world-class global cocktailian. So Lauren is going to share some insights on the work that she's been doing to help future-proof our industry, bringing greater awareness and appreciation for the rising no and low alcohol trend, and to enable drinkers and non-drinkers alike to be able to all grab a seat at the table. And then you have me, I'm Claire Warner, I'm the co-founder of Acorn, and I'll be moderating today's chat and chipping in with ways in which we can help balance our competing desires to help maintain our health and well-being through our social circles. So does socializing truly save lives? What do we think? Robin, set us off. Why do we even socialize? What is it about human beings that is, you know, so social?
Oh, I think it's just because we belong to the family of monkeys and apes, really, and the whole kind of evolutionary strategy of monkeys and apes has been this almost unique, intense form of sociality. They have friendships that are in many ways very similar to our own. And the reason they have it is really to provide buffering and support within their social groups, and the social groups themselves, in a sense, are clusters of friends, you might say, which look outwards to protect them from outside threats. So your close friends sort of buffer you against the stresses of living in the group so that you can live in these big groups and be protected against predators and what have you. But the friendships they have, like ours, are really incredibly intense and depend on really a lot of physical contact. They bond their friendships, their relationships through social grooming, which triggers the endorphin system in the brain. The endorphin system is part of the brain's sort of pain management system, and it being an opiate, it's the name comes from a contraction of endogenous morphine, meaning the brain's own morphine, in effect. You get this kind of opiate high, which kind of makes you feel very happy and contented, and all's well with the world, but at the same time reduces stress. It actually elevates your pain threshold, so you don't feel pain so much. And in the same process, actually seems to trigger the immune system and buffers you against sort of all those nasties that keep finding their way into our bodies and giving us all these diseases which we'd rather not have. So kind of I suppose that's why friends buffer you against illness and so on, that not only they give you this psychological lift, you know, it's the best antidepressant you could ever have, but it also protects you against at least minor illnesses and diseases and viruses and all these kind of things. So these are definitely the case that friends are good for you. The mechanism that is used, if you like, by the brain to create friendships, the endorphin system, which we share with monkeys and apes. What we've done is just found other ways of sort of elaborating that and triggering the same system by other activities, which in particular don't mean we have to physically be in contact with somebody, so we can do it virtually. And these have included a whole bunch of things like laughter and singing and dancing and telling stories and the like, but also feasting. So eating turns out to kick in the endorphin system, but so does alcohol. Alcohol is a particularly good trigger of the endorphin system for reasons which I don't think we really know, but it does so. And that comes back to the fact that, you know, alcohol has played such an important role, certainly in historical times, in building friendships, both for feasting sort of large groups of people, but also, you know, having a glass of wine with a friend on a pleasant summer evening. Those kinds of sort of more low-key social events. Now alcohol is actually quite interesting because, of course, it's a poison. It's actually a poison excreted by during the process of fermentation. But we've actually, along with the African great apes, the chimpanzees and gorillas, uniquely evolved a set of enzymes which allow us to detoxify. Well, it's not so much detoxify it. What it is reconvert the alcohol back into sugars, so that we can use the sugars for energy and so on. But it seems in the process of doing that, the alcohol when we consume it actually triggers the endorphin system, so we get a double benefit here. But this system of enzymes that allows us to do that, it is very finely balanced. Actually, one converts the alcohol into another chemical, which is actually extremely poisonous. But the second enzyme converts that poisonous aldehyde back into sugars, and they have to be in perfect balance. And the only species that really can do this is us and the African great apes. It seems to have been an adaptation to exploiting naturally fermenting fruit on the forest floor at a time in Africa about 10 million years ago, when the forests were contracting, food was in very much short supply. But none of the other monkeys and apes, and not really any of the other species, can do it. They kind of get roaring drunk very quickly by even a small amount of alcohol, so they on the whole tend to avoid it. But it's clearly we have this very long history with it. What we can't tell is when our lineage, humans, first started fermenting stuff for themselves, as it were. But we know that from about 6,000 or 7,000 BC, they were fermenting large vats of wine-like drinks in the Middle East and in China around about the same time. And there is some evidence from Southern Africa of honey being used to make mead. It's only indirect evidence, but it does suggest that if that's the case, the deliberate fermentation of sweet things, if you like, as opposed to just picking up semi-rotten fruit from the forest floor, that fermentation process goes back at least 50,000 years ago in our history. So it is a very ancient thing. And of course, the problem with alcohol is, if you overdo it, a little alcohol is probably good for you. But too much alcohol and you go over the top, and it's destructive in so many different ways, both socially and medically for you, which probably accounts for the fact that a number of societies through history, have tried to legislate against it in one way or another. But that's essentially the story of the role that alcohol has played in our social life, and it's clearly a very old one, and clearly been quite an important one in the sense that it's allows, well, I suppose what it does is allow groups of strangers to sit down and feast together and get to know each other.
Why do you think that some communities or societies have evolved to use alcohol in that way and give alcohol its sort of social lubricant status, whereas others perhaps have put less focus on building community or social circles in that way, in the case of tea and coffee societies, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there are some differences. I mean, the Chinese, for example, have a different version of one of the enzymes, which the Han Chinese, this is, and it causes them to get drunk much faster, and they get this sort of particular effect from it, which other peoples from the rest of the world don't. As a sort of something's happened in the course of local Chinese evolution, where a particular version of the relevant gene has changed very slightly. But that's kind of unusual. I think most peoples from all over the world otherwise handle alcohol in much the same sort of way. I think the problem is socially, you can develop a culture which kind of goes over the top. And way back in Roman times, you know, some of the Roman historians, when the Roman Empire was advancing into Northern Europe, and they were in the process of crossing the Rhine and coming across all these Germanic barbarians to the north, who are today, of course, are the Germans and the Dutch and ourselves and the Scandinavians, and they're absolutely horrified because these people seem to just drink to get drunk, whereas, you know, civilized Mediterranean folk, as they still do by and large, drink socially or have a glass or two of wine. Well, it's not to say the Romans didn't occasionally get drunk, but, you know, they didn't set out Saturday night to just get the whole lot of everybody, as it were, in the pub completely legless, which is what the sort of Northern Europeans were doing 2,000 years ago, and I'm sorry to say appear not to have advanced much beyond that. But that difference is very much still there, and I think the problem is that kind of culture was so long lasting. You can see it through the 18th century, the Hogarth Gin Lane pictures and gin as known as Mother's Ruin and all this kind of thing. It was a big problem. Over drinking was a big problem then. You had it in America, where in the 19th century in particular, among the European, mainly British Isles, sort of before the arrival of large numbers of Europeans, when the population was still heavily British, if you like, and a lot of drunkenness, and you had the temperance movement arising to try and ban it and to control it, and the temperance movement spread over into Britain in the mid-19th century. Was in the early part of the 20th century. You had prohibition in America, where it was banned completely. And indeed, prohibition carried on in some states until really quite late, I think, until perhaps even the 1950s, 1960s in individual states. And certainly some states had much more restrictive drinking laws. So, you know, there's been this perpetual bother, I think, by part of the community that, you know, people are not handling this drug, if you like, particularly well, and it's better to ban it. And I think that probably goes back to its origins of being banned in Islam, for example, which has tended to ban a number of other drugs as well, including tobacco, as, you know, sort of socially inappropriate, because it leads to, if you like, bad behavior. But what's interesting in that, and maybe Pedro's got something to tell us about this, is what's rather kind of interesting is the Islamic cultures as they sort of grew up, if you like. So that's the sort of Mediterranean and Near East geographically, heavily went into drinking very, very strong coffee. And although nobody's actually ever looked at this yet, as far as I know, I deeply suspect that very strong coffee produces the same kick in the endorphin system. That's okay. It you know, gives you the usual lifts that we associate with it, but that down underneath that, if we were to look, we'd also find a kicking in of the endorphin system, and that's kind of why we like it. And, you know, that first coffee in the morning sets the day up in a way that nothing else does. And maybe teas, that may be true of strong teas. Maybe why we have these strong teas in some cases, so Assam type teas, as opposed to the very light, polite teas, which the Europeans like.
So lovely segue into Pedro telling us about whether, you know, you can empathize or with what Robin's been saying about very strong tea, very strong coffee. You know, what's your experience of those cultures as you go on your travels to explore them in that sort of detail?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Robin, I'm happier than ever to be a great ape and to get an endorphin kick from all of these things and socialize with my friend great apes. So to me, sharing food and drinks has been critical to building relationships. I'm Mexican. I grew up in Mexico City. I speak some you know, Chinese. It's enough to have a basic conversation, but it's by no means fluent. I have some working knowledge of Japanese, but again, I communicate maybe like a 3-year-old kid. So I've had to use a different kind of language, and in many ways this has been just sharing food and drinks. One of my favorite places in the world is Yunnan, the province in the south of China, north of Laos and Burma, south of Tibet. Yunnan has, and you would know more than anybody else, but 23 ethnic minorities. They all have their own languages. Many of them have their own alphabets. So it's a phenomenal land with as much diversity as you could like. Many of these folks, like I said, have they all speak some kind of Mandarin, usually not perfect Mandarin, and then their own native language. So if you climb a certain mountain, you're going to be hanging out with people who speak Hani or Lao Hu or Dai, and everybody gets together, and everybody gets together around food and drink. I have never felt my life is in danger, but I can tell you that these relationships have saved my business. So I haven't been able to go to China for quite a while, and very often I still get messages from my friends over there on WeChat, and they send me pictures from their KTV or their tea harvest, and now that things went south for many of us in the business world, I've had the great blessing that some of them said, hey, chill, I'll send you some tea and you pay me later whenever you can.
Wow.
So just this idea of sitting around the fire and drinking and sharing food has been critical. I would say that in my job sourcing, probably 40% of my job is about learning about tea and discovering things and actually getting some data and tasting, and 60% of it is really building relationships. An interesting thing about this is we talk about the tea cultures. There are fewer stronger tea cultures than China or Japan or Korea. People take their tea very seriously, but alcohol is also very important. As we can see in the videos, this is a Hani community, and you will say I'm joking. They look like my countrymen in Oaxaca, because we are extremely similar. And the first part of the video, you'll see it's a singing, it's a drinking song. It mixes several languages. It ends up in a language called Dai, that chibado, it means, let's drink up. And after that, in this particular video, I happened to bring a bottle of mezcal from my homeland, and you will see the whole group just cheering in Spanish now. So alcohol has definitely become an interesting part of my work. I've had very similar experiences in Korea and Japan. In one case, I brought, when my Japanese was completely non-existent, I brought a bottle of mezcal to a new village in Shizuoka. And I met a farmer and said, hey, this is for you, man. So he was a gentleman in his 70s. He invited all of his friends from high school and said, hey, let's drink up, man. This is weird. I've never tried this. Let's drink up. We ended up having wild boar shabu shabu, and he sashimied some deer. So it was a big party, and it revolved around a bottle of some crazy liquor that somebody brought from Mexico.
Abajo, al centro, pa' dentro.
There's also very, very strong power in tea and tea culture. And I would like to emphasize at least 3 different traditions. One of them is what we sometimes call in China gongfu cha, which really means it takes some skill. There's no particular rule in gongfu cha in general. It just means that you're paying some attention to what you're doing. And if all of us were not on Zoom, we would be, let's say we would be in the same room. I would probably be pouring tea for you. This conversation would be happening all the same. Everything will revolve around the tea, but tea will not stop the conversation. My job is to get your cups full, and your job is, if you don't like it, you just throw it away, and I'll pour more tea. And at some point we might all comment, "This is great. The tea is delicious." The tea keeps us all together on the same table, but it doesn't interrupt our conversation. Very different kind of relationship built over tea can be experienced in Sado, Japanese, the Japanese way of tea. This case, it's a little bit different. There's a performer. And if I perform tea for you guys, I would be the host, you would be my guests. You would be all lined up. There's a very, very strong Confucian influence in this kind of tradition. So you would be lined up in terms of the importance of guests. As a performer, as a tea performer, I only succeed if my performance makes you happy. So I have to be able to connect with you. I have to be able to read you. My job is that by the time that we finish having this this experience together, you guys go like, wow, I liked it. And in many ways, you might break a little bit with tradition. You might not do things exactly as you had planned originally, but we have to connect. And I have to learn how to read you. The third one, which is a bit more primitive, and Robin, I think you might find this also kind of interesting, is a tradition called Toyama Sado, or the way of tea in Toyama. There is one gentleman in the world who still makes this kind of tea. Usually you serve it in these things, which is called a gorohachi chawan, and you use this kind of whisk. Unlike traditional tea ceremony, which is very fancy and beautiful and organized, this is the opposite, and we'll also see it in the video. It was built around the Buddhist tradition, and what these guys wanted was they wanted to get people together. So to get people together, you need a couple of things. Number one is fire. Everybody likes to hang out around the fire. Number two is drinks. You have to provide something for people to be drinking, otherwise they'll get bored and scoot. And these guys were very, very smart. The third thing that they added was a game, a challenge. So there's a giant pot, you're boiling your tea, somebody scoops tea and gives it to you in your bowl, and each of us would have a bowl. Then I would say, I'll whisk it, and I need to make froth. It's violent frothing. That's why it's called bata bata, because when you do this, it sounds bata 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 bata. And then I would compare this with all of you, and Lauren, who's a master drink maker, would probably beat me, and she would say, haha, I beat you. And I would say, no, and I need to try again. So I'll make more froth until I can finally beat Lauren, which is probably not going to happen. But we would all gather around fire, drinks, and a game. It also, like, tea definitely has a way of triggering endorphins. There are different kinds of teas, as you probably know. There's anything from green to black to pu'er, and they all act in a different way. Not all tea is good for all people. In general, when you're younger, you want to release heat, so you go for greener teas. In general, as you age, you go for aged fermented teas. The only way of knowing which tea is right for you is by drinking it. So my job as a tea performer would be to make tea for you guys. If I see you smile, perfect, I'll give you more of the same. If I see it's not working for you, my job is to change it and do something that works for you, because otherwise, instead of building a relationship, I will destroy it.
What sort of tea do we drink when we're sort of the middle age, Pedro? That's what I'm interested in. Like a bit of both, a bit of green, a bit of
both.
Yeah, I'm asking for a friend here,
Yeah, for a friend.
She's asking for me.
Tell your middle-aged friend that there's no set rule. In general, in Asian medicine, younger people tend to have a lot of fire, so you need to take out that fire. You need to deheat. As people age, like my grandmother, she always has a shawl. She's always a bit cold, so they need something a bit warmer. But it's really weird. Like some people just never let the fire go, and for those people, we still need to feed them something cooler. If I were to talk to your middle-aged friend, I would say, let me make a bit of a lineup for you. Let me give you a bunch of stuff, and drink it. And drinking tea in Asia is a little bit different versus drinking tea sometimes in the West. In the West, you try it, you see what it does to your mouth, you like it or you don't, but that's it. Drinking tea in Asia, you take a bit longer. It's not just about drinking it, It's about feeling it. If after half an hour you feel great, super, that tea is for you. So I would make a nice collection for your middle-aged friend, and I'll explain how to drink it. And whatever makes you feel great, then we will probably build a relationship.
I love it. I love it. One of the things I wanted to just call out, and maybe Robin, you can shed some light on this. There seems to be a theme, friendships, gathering around the fire, playing games, eating. What's happening there? These feel like things we naturally gravitate towards now, but they seem also quite primal in their base attraction. What's going on there?
There is something very primal about fire and the evening, I think. But before I just say something about that, let me just go back to what Pedro is saying, because he's just illuminated my entire life in a way I hadn't expected. And that is just true, but amazing, that when I was sort of in my 20s, I drank an awful lot of jasmine tea and light Chinese teas and really loved them. I haven't drunk the stuff for years. I drink Assam and heavy dark fermented teas now in my old age. It's right. You're right. You're absolutely right. These things change with age. Anyway, so the nighttime, I think there's something magical about the nighttime that uses this intense feeling of social warmth, as it were. Anything that warms you triggers an endorphin response anyway. So I'm sure, actually thinking about it, the fact that we drink tea by and large and coffee hot, or at least warm, it contributes to triggering an endorphin effect. But we know that we kind of gained control over fire about 400,000 years ago. In fact, before we were even humans, our ancestors in the sort of archaic human period, the Neanderthals and Heidelberg folk mastered fire, and I think that allowed them to shift a lot of their social stuff into the evening, because effectively it extended the working day, if you like, and gave them another 3 or 4 hours into the evening, which they could use for both eating and what else do you do in the dark sitting around a fire except talk and tell jokes and sing songs and things like that. And I think that shifting of our social bonding period that we needed each day into the evening then freed off the rest of the day to do the food finding that you needed to do, which then allowed these people to have much bigger social communities as a result of this kind. But I think it's left that sort of psychological hangover, if you like, with us, that somehow doing social things in this semi-dark is much more kind of enlivening and invigorating and exciting than doing it in daylight. And you get the feeling, if you go to a concert or a theatre in the evening performance, you come away thinking this is spectacular. If you see the same performance in the matinee during daylight, it's interesting, but that's about it. It doesn't have the same pizzing, as it were, that doing something in the dark is. So,
how much are you doing in the dark with Community Brew, Lauren? Talk to us about what you're doing with the tea and coffee communities and the work that you're doing with Community Brew. All in the dark, by fireside. What's going on there?
Sometimes when the companies shut off our electrical and Wi-Fi when we're in the middle of teaching Zoom seminars and things. Yeah. No, it's been a really interesting conversation, and I suppose to put it in context first, Community Brew is the name of one of our modules that we are doing for a program called World Class Studios, which is the educational arm to World Class, which is the world's largest and longest running competition for bartenders. And we work with bartenders across 60 countries, 400,000 over the last 12 years. But one of our most important things is to develop groundbreaking and really innovative, creative education to help bartenders scratch their heads, come up with the new innovative and creative ways to look at drinks. And Community Brew is one that started with Kettle One. Kettle One Vodka, it's the entire purpose of this brand is about working with bartenders to recognize what community means to them. So for a bartender anywhere in the world, pick a country, a community to them might be their neighborhood, it might be their bar team, it might be their nuclear or chosen family, it might be a cause that they firmly believe in, a charity, and so on and so forth. And what we're trying to do is to take this idea of community and two other things that we connect with community on a regular basis, but perhaps don't realize, which would be coffee and tea, and how we can bring those three elements together and give that bartender the power of telling a new story in their bar with a drink based with Kettle One, and how that drink, using coffee or tea, or perhaps both if they want to get really crazy, how that can actually benefit their community. So giving parts of the sales back, using the drink as sort of a jumping off point to raise awareness for a cause that they believe in. So it's actually been a very interesting journey and experience. And this is the first time we're talking about it because it's due to launch right around the time of Tales. So this is sort of a sneak peek, if you will. And it's actually, you know, it's actually Pedro that inspired me originally, because we've known each other for almost 15 years. Back in Vancouver, and I used to buy tea and flowers out of the trunk of his car outside the bar that I was running in Vancouver, and I still have some of those teas today vacuum sealed in my storage unit. But the way that Pedro was working with and communicating about the communities that he was bringing these different foraged botanicals or silver needles tea, white moonlight. There was this, osmanthus oolong tea that was aged in barrels that tasted like Nanaimo bars. There are so many amazing things that evoked every sensory palate moment that you could imagine going in different directions as a bartender. But it was the way he spoke about the communities that he would get them from, with nothing but a backpack, and he's going through the mountains in different regions of the world, bringing back these unique and beautiful things that help us to change the way we think about flavor, but also change the way we think about the people that are creating and cultivating these ingredients that are used for our ultimate achievement of deliciousness, I suppose.
Delicious. And you asked me to include the slide on sugar. How does that play a role in socializing and community?
Well, it's so I just finished reading this book called Sugar by James Walvin, and it was really fascinating. I think a lot of the book is quite enlightening. A lot of it is quite dark. I mean, it sheds light on a very dark time, I think, in colonial past for sure. But the parts that I found really interesting as it related to this conversation is that, the creation of local spots where folks were connecting. And, Robin, you talked about, the Near and Middle East and sort of other areas of the Eastern Mediterranean, and Pedro about Asia, that, these areas where it was mainly male sociability, where people would get together, and whether it was alcohol was allowed or not, oftentimes it was coffee and tea, and really strong, astringent, super acidic coffee that was loaded with sugar as the 1-2 punch to make it palatable. But that was where people were connecting. And as that started to take off because of sugar, coffee, and tea, the three of those things ended up becoming so closely knit together, creating the grocery store, the corner shop, the way that confectionery would start to take off, and the biscuits, and how those paired with coffee and tea to create the simpler, complex social occasions at home or in the coffee shop, or maybe in Northern and Western Europe, in the cafes where alcohol and coffee and tea were served side by side. So it was a part of James's book that I was surprised to learn about. And I had this aha moment because of all the work we're doing on coffee and tea and also social occasions, that sugar was right there, helping to sort of bring that socialization of the coffee shop and the cafe to life, that today is still, whether you're drinking or you're not, it's still a place where people gather and spend large amounts of time connecting with each other.
Absolutely. It is interesting to me that we do so much of our connecting over food and drink, and that it's culturally so important to us, but seemingly we kind of, I don't know, we don't seem to sort of, we might take it for granted a little, we forget almost that we come together over food and drink, and it does something very it triggers so much in us, emotions, endorphins, it harks back to, you know, our ancestors' ability to transcend some of the barriers to connection through finding new ways to trigger the endorphin system, Robin.
Absolutely, and it is actually amazing. I mean, you're quite right that we somehow take it for granted and don't really think about it, but it is amazing how important sitting down to eat with people is and has been right the way through history and in all cultures. You know, that's, you know, when strangers arrive at your homestead or your camp or whatever it is, you know, you offer them meat and drink. It's just how it is, yeah. And that's how we do it. And you know, we take it sort of for granted as second nature, but actually it's probably doing a very important service in the way eating and drinking, particularly, you know, well, any, I suppose, of these kind of more astringent type drinks that, you know, that are likely to trigger in the endorphin system through that astringency, you know, sets you up to feel very well disposed to the people you're sitting down with. And it's very, these endorphin effects are very specific to the people you do the activity with, whether it's, you know, singing or laughing or eating or drinking. It's specifically the people you do it with. It doesn't change your relationship to everybody else you know, including your best friend or your mum and dad or whoever, if they're not present on the occasion. It's very focused on the people you're doing it with.
It's a lovely segue actually to bring us to the topic of how our drinking behaviours and what we're drinking is changing. Lauren, I know that you're doing lots of work on future-proofing or looking at the no and low ABV trend. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Definitely, and I think just to echo a bit what Robin was saying there too about the, you know, being present in the occasion. We all have to learn how, or relearn how to be social, because you know, we're relearning how to small talk, to how to share space, how to interpret social cues, new level of safety. I mean, this is a brand new world that we're walking into right now, and it's interesting. But with that, it comes with a lot of different opportunities for our lifestyles to also change. And we have that power of choice. And social media, I mean, they call it social media for a reason, is very, very social. And I'm not going to hit you with too many numbers and percentages and facts and things, but I feel a couple of them would be really important. But the fact is, you know, drinking habits have changed a lot over the last 5 to 10 years, and it will continue to change because each of these occasions is becoming sessionable. So regardless of what you're drinking in the moment, you are there to connect with people. And I think one of the most important things that we have had to really understand and sort of bring an answer to is, for those that are not drinking, do they miss out on the occasion? And the answer is no. And we see in the past as well that coffee and tea, no alcohol included, people are still getting together and socializing. So it's the act of sort of bringing spaces to life, safe spaces where people can feel like they can be themselves, and they do have access to delicious, wonderful, and exciting experiences that can complement in the same way as going to a standard bar and ordering an alcoholic beverage. So Future Proof is another module that we're building as part of the same World Class Studios education program. And this time we're looking at how to properly bring in the conversation of no and low alcohol into the space where the consumer, the guest, the bartender, whomever it is still looking forward to having something delicious, with purpose, meaningful, and with each other without feeling obligated or trying to search, you know, for something on the menu that fits what their lifestyle is. Now, with that comes a lot of other caveats. When our lifestyle starts to change and lean towards no and low, it's likely because we have also discovered that we don't want to consume as much sugar as we did before. We want to start making edits to the number of preservatives, or we're becoming just more conscious consumers in the sense that we are being more mindful in how we spend our dollar, what we're putting in our body. And the fact is, we can do that because we have access to so much on the market right now. We've never been in a time where we've had access to as many flavors, as many brands, as many spaces in which to consume, how to stay connected with our friends, whether in person in our communities physically or virtually all over the world or here on Zoom. And so I think, future proof is helping to just, I guess, release a little bit of the anxiety that people might have, whether a bartender being the one that is constructing the menu and making the drinks appropriate for their entire consumer base, or it's the consumer or the guest that is coming into the bar and feeling like they belong. And part of socializing and being really effective at it is feeling like you're not an imposter, feeling like you belong, that there is something there for you. So a couple of numbers that I just wanted to share quickly. So if the power of choice, and we have the power to spend our dollar in the way that we do, whether as brands or as bartenders, consumers, what have you, the times are changing. And if you look at Generation Z or millennials, so 18 to 34, legal purchasing age, 51% of them get ideas where to go, what to drink, what to wear, what to do based on what their friends post on social media, and from that, it's almost like the credibility that you can do whatever you like. Your friends have become influencers. They have the power to influence their friends. And even with bartenders, all bartenders have become influencers. So if we firmly believe in a lifestyle that we've chosen, or a lifestyle that we realize there is a void in variety or opportunity or flavors or what have you, then it's up to us to use our power of influence to share with the wider, guest base and consumer base that we have delicious shrubs, vinegar-based things working for you. We've got beautiful products like acorn and seedlip if you're choosing not to drink. If you're choosing to take something a little lower in octane, we have, Kettle One Botanical at 30%. You can choose to drink mindfully, even with a 40% spirit, by using just half the portion. So I think this education is important, and it's our job, as me as an educator, and for you all as educators, and for everyone tuning in today, that we need to be able to think 3 steps ahead of what our guests and wider industry is thinking, and be able to create innovative and creative ways that they can use it to make better business choices, to really future-proof what the future of our industry looks like. And it's my job to help create what that education package looks like and drip feed it over a slow period of time, so bartenders everywhere feel like they're getting enough information and enough resources to help them make it happen.
Because the ultimate goal is to enable more of us to be social, to stay social, to find the opportunities and the occasions to build or maintain our relationships. And by giving more seats at the table, by encouraging more people to go out and drink, whether they're drinking tonight or not, facilitates sociability, which is amazing, which is what we need. The topic of this seminar is Socializing Saves Lives, which might sound dramatic, but actually has been shown over the last few years, Robin, that our friendships do actually save lives in more ways than one. As we wrap up, would you mind just talking a little bit to that, and then we can finish on how we'll continue to save each other's lives in the future by just being social?
Yeah, I think one of the big surprises of the last decade and a half has been the sort of huge volume of medical epidemiology studies showing that the single best predictor of your psychological health and well-being, your physical health and well-being, even how long you're going to live into the future from the current moment, is the number of and the quality of close friends that you have. And it sort of comes out way ahead of all the things your friendly neighborhood doctor worries about on your behalf, and things like, how obese you are, how bad your diet is, how much exercise you don't take, what the air quality you're breathing in your local town is like. All these things, they're not unimportant, of course, but they come way down second best compared to just the simple fact of the number of close friendships you have and maintain. And we did a study recently, a pan-European study, so it's across 13 different European countries, and looking at the development of signs of depression and depressive states in people over the age of about 55, I think was the youngest. So it was a prospective study in that sense. And the single best predictor of that was really just the number of friends you have, or you could substitute some friends for voluntary activities. That's quite good. You couldn't do both together. You couldn't have 5 good friends and do, say, 3 voluntary activities, because that left you completely spaced out and you didn't have enough time to really devote to each. But having the right balance of those and you know, sort of optimally 5 friends in the limit really does seem to protect you. And it's not so much, I mean, clearly friends kind of, you know, good friends will bring you bowls of chicken broth when you're sick in bed and all those kind of ministrations. But I think the really important thing is actually what you do with them. It's being able to get out and sit around a table and have a chat, sit down, have a chat and a laugh, and occasionally sing a song, and maybe even do such things as dancing, for heaven's sakes, when we're allowed to get close together again. But it's those things that really trigger the endorphin system and give us this, both this lift and this kind of protection from the physical diseases that we're assaulted by day in, day out, and from the world, as it were. So there's no question, I think, that friendship is good for you, and that it kind of explains why we have this hunger to do it, and why, in some sense, lockdown has been a trial for people, because they've not been able to get out and they've not been able to do these kind of things they used to do with their friends. And, you know, sort of, you know, we shall all, I'm sure, look forward to being able to get back to normality again, and sit down and have whatever your particular favorite tipple is. And I just sort of comment on what Lauren was saying, actually. I mean, I remember sort of back when drink driving was first made illegal in Britain and probably Europe and many other places around the same time. You know, and some friend had to volunteer to be the driver for everybody, so you could go from sort of visiting pubs in the countryside, and it was regarded as a miserable short straw to be the driver, because, you know, you sat there with your fizzy lemonade or something. But and people, you know, kind of try to avoid doing it and let some other poor sucker do it. But I think the big difference now is we've got all these other things that, you know, you guys have invented that substitute extremely well and are a pleasure to drink, and certainly are much better than the low alcohol beers that were originally first attempted, which were close to undrinkable. You know, now it's actually, you know, a pleasure to go out and sit down. Sure, everybody else can have their glass of wine or their beer if they like, and you can be contented and enjoy the social situation with your acorn or whatever it may be that you happen to take, that gives you the same kind of lift, really.
Robin, you know, the other thing on that is there's no more awkward conversation at the table where you have to out yourself and say, I'm the designated driver. You can now just sit down and be a human in a bar and restaurant and say, I will have whatever for absolutely no reason that I need to tell you, which is nice.
And we've also learned today that, you know, we can trigger the endorphin system without alcohol using ingredients that are astringent or spicy or bitter. All those things without the alcohol will do a brilliant job of triggering the endorphin system and helping us, you know, feel bonded and cozy and comforted together. Just want to wrap up by throwing it out to you, Pedro. You know, we now know the importance of staying social. What advice would you give to people as we emerge out of the pandemic for ways to stay social? Perhaps, you know, what top tips would you give to somebody who was trying to make new friends when language might be a challenge?
I would say de-stress. Just you know, don't be afraid to approach someone. In my case, you know, in many of my travels, I speak absolutely no Lao, absolutely no Thai. Just the fact that you are willing to sit at a table and share food or drinks is super useful. Just getting in you know, in many cases in these countries, they'll invite you inside the house and say, hey, sit by the fire. And my understanding of the conversation has been zero, absolutely nothing. But just hanging around the fire and watching your fellow human beings and perhaps drinking something together, at some point they'll look at you and they'll start giggling or laughing or whatever, and in a way you're friends. So you know, just sit down with people, just look at them, you know, outdoors if you still feel a bit nervous about viruses and all, but hang out with your fellow great apes.
Yes. And Lauren, what advice would you give to anybody that's feeling apprehensive about getting back out into being social?
I think we learned some valuable lessons about ourselves and about what's possible with technology during the last 18 months that won't necessarily disappear by the snap of a finger because we're vaccinated or back out in the world or what have you. So I think really taking stock of the things that you loved, that you had to figure out how to love during the pandemic, because we didn't all have a loveless 18 months. There were things that we did enjoy doing, and you don't have to stop doing those just because the doors swing open again. So I think when you did reach out for those individual one-on-one coffees with folks, and maybe you hadn't done that previously, I think it's still great to do that. Still pick up the phone and have phone calls with people. You know, it doesn't have to be in person if you feel uncomfortable, but I think there were definitely some big and wonderful lessons learned during the last 18 months.
100%. And Robin, lessons for an introvert, somebody who perhaps is not wanting to rush out into making new friends. What advice would you give?
Oh, I think old friends are the place to go. And I think really, if introverts and extroverts, start small. I mean, don't, you know, sort of try and put some enormous concert party together. You know, a quiet cup of coffee or a drink with one maybe two other people, or just a walk in the park, really. You know, anything like that is good. But I think you know, Pedro mentioned laughter, and I think that's actually very important, because that, you know, we laugh all the time, and I think it's very important to exploit that, or the capacity of laughter to create friendships, because it really does. It's a kind of icebreaker in many ways, and also because it's extremely visceral. If somebody laughs, even if you can't understand a word they said, you will laugh. You can't help laughing, you know. So you know, sort of go out and I think actually the advice is do what you did before. Don't sort of try and overthink it. You know, just return to your natural habits as quickly as you can, and go out and you know, sort of, you will laugh with people, and as soon as somebody tells a joke, you know, away you go, and that's how friendships are made.
And also accepting that it might be a little weird, because our social muscles might have atrophied over the last few months, and that's entirely natural. That's normal. You know, I was doing a presentation the other day in front of 10 people, all socially distanced, and I had no idea what to do with my hands. I was really like, what are these things for now? Where do I put them? So I think we've lost some of the art of being social and being in each other's company, but it will come back. You know, I think we just need to strengthen the muscles and jump back on the bike, and remember how important and life-saving the art of socializing can be. If in doubt, make a cup of tea for somebody. That's my advice. Yes, Lauren.
I was going to say, Claire, we need your advice as well, but was that your advice, the cup of tea?
My advice really is, I think as I come out of this experience, is to place much more emphasis, much more value on the importance of the table, coming together over food and drink. And it doesn't have to be a fancy meal. It can be some toast and a cup of tea. It can be as simple as you like, but just how powerful that moment of connection can be with somebody over a drink, over a snack. Whether it's alcohol, whether it's tea, whether it's acorn, whether it's something else, you know, it's so important that we recognize what that does for us, so mentally, physically, and that I hope that we recognise as an industry the important role we all play in helping to facilitate everybody's social lives so that they can find a safe place, an exciting place, an entertaining place to go out and to maintain their friendships or build new ones. So, so thank you everybody for joining us on this talk. Thank you to my esteemed panelists. Pedro, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just something I had to, because I heard your advice, and I think it's spot on. And you know, I just wanted to add that one of the ways to say hello in China is "Have you eaten?" So and you can say that to a perfect stranger, and that's how I met one of my best friends in Nano Mountain. He just said, "Dude, have you eaten?" And you know, I didn't know it was just a way. So I said, "No." I said, "Yeah, come to my house. You know, come hang out." And he became one of my best friends. So your advice as we come out of this weird situation, pandemic, you know, I guess those guys have probably seen a bunch of pandemics, and they know how to get out of them. And have you eaten remained one of the ways to just say hello to a perfect stranger.
There you go. I would now like to be greeted by that every time I see somebody, friends new or old. That is the new way to say hello to me. Have you eaten? That is music to my ears. I love to eat. So that's a brilliant way to wrap up. Have you eaten? Thank you so much for bringing this subject to life. For more information, you can reach out to all of us through social media. I do recommend you go out and buy and read Robin's book called Friends, which is fascinating. Also buy some delicious tea from Pedro, because I'm sure it's delicious. Can't wait to receive mine. And I don't know, Lauren, just watch you on social media, listen to your educational top tips, learn from Lauren, be immersed by what Lauren can share with us. I think that's everything that Lauren does, we love. So
it is.
Do more of that. Yeah. So thank you so much. And it was a pleasure. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Tales. And thank you for Tales the Cocktail for enabling us to have this hour together. And hope to see you out there soon. Have you eaten?
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for hosting.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.